We're going to move on now in our programming to our first panel for this conference. So the name of the panel is, it's a thought leadership panel. Where do we go from here? So within the context of women in communication, women breaking barriers, which we just talked about, where do we go from here? So we're going to start by introducing and inviting up the people that will be partaking in this panel with us. So first, please, ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for Mindy Marques. She's the Executive Director and Vice President for News at the Miami Herald. We're gonna have her come up here. Aminda, who goes by Mindy Marques Gonzalez, is Executive Director and Vice President for News at the Miami Herald. Born in New York to Cuban immigrant parents, Marques began her career as an intern at the Miami Herald and rose through the ranks to become the paper's first Hispanic editor in 2010. She is only the second woman to hold that post. Round of applause for that, please. Her careers included assignments as a Metro reporter, assistant city editor, and deputy Metro editor, directing the Miami Herald's local, state, and community news operations. She also was Miami bureau chief for People magazine, overseeing coverage at that time for the Southeast U.S., the Caribbean, and Latin America, definitely a very significant role. She returned to the Miami Herald in 2007, where she was a multimedia editor and Sunday features editor before being named managing editor. Under her leadership, the Miami Herald was named a Pulitzer Prize finalist for its 2010 coverage of the earthquake in Haiti. A big award indeed. Another round of applause for that. In 2012, the Miami Herald was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in Public Service for a series detailing Florida's systematic failures in regulating assisted living facilities. The Miami Herald has won 20 Pulitzer Prizes in its history, and definitely...
Just to brag a little bit, now 22.
Now 22, all right. A bigger round of applause for that. Thank you for the update. Who's counting after a dozen, though, right? So, Marques is a 1986 graduate of the University of Florida, where she was honored as an alumni of distinction by the College of Journalism and Communications. She serves on the boards of the Pulitzer Prize, the Associated Press Media Editors, and the Poynter Institute's Advisory Council. Another big round of applause. Thank you for being here. Rochelle Oliver, we're going to invite her up, please. She's a staff editor of the New York Times. Rochelle Oliver started at the New York Times in 2014, working as a digital producer for the international desk. Later, she joined the national desk, where she handled the digital orchestration of countless news events, including the spate of mass shootings in 2015 from Charleston to Chattanooga, Tennessee, Lafayette, Massachusetts, and many more. Today, Miss Oliver, a proud FIU alumna, serves as a copy editor on the breaking news desk at the New York Times. Big round of applause for this young lady, please. Lauren Wolfe, we'll invite her up here. She's the director of Women Under Siege, Women's Media Center. Wolfe is an award-winning journalist who has written for publications from The Atlantic to The Guardian. She's currently the director of WMC's Women Under Siege, a project on sexualized violence in conflict originated by Gloria Stedman at the Women's Media Center in New York. The project includes a live crowdsourced map of sexualized violence in Syria, womenundersiege.syria.com, crowdmap.com. We'll post that up for you later. She serves on the advisory committee of the Noble Women's Initiative's international campaign to stop rape and gender violence. Now, from the BBC to CNN, Wolfe has spoken about her work on TV and radio internationally. Wolfe spent 3 years at the New York Times reporting on September 11th for the Times Book's 102 Minutes, The Flight to Survive Inside the Twin Towers, a 2005 National Book Award finalist by Jim Dwyer and Kevin Flynn, and City in the Sky, The Rise and Fall of the World Trade Center by James Glantz and Eric Limpton. She studied at Wesleyan University and Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism and is the recipient of 4 awards from the Society of Professional Journalists, 2 from the Fair Media Council, and is the 2012 recipient of the Frank Ochberg Award for Media and Trauma Study from the International Society for Traumatic Stress Studies. A big round of applause for this woman, please. So obviously they have impressive bios, very accomplished women, and we're very happy to have them here to talk about this. And so we're going to start out just making this a little conversational, actually with a look at what our topic is for this morning panel. So where do we go from here? How far have we come? Where do we go from here? I'm going to start with Rochelle Oliver, because you work with a lot of females, New York Times, Big Shot Magazine, a lot of people that have worked really hard to get there, and a lot of women that have maybe had challenges getting to where they are. So can you touch on this topic? Where are we and where do we go?
I took an interesting approach to this question because there's really there isn't. First of all, let me back up. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Kopenhaver, for putting this together. And thank you for everyone for your interest in this topic. And I see men in here who are also interested in this topic, which I think is great because I think that obviously this isn't a problem that we can solve just with 50% of the population, but it needs to be, I think, a wholehearted approach. So I was tackling this question and wondering what's the answer. How do I provide something that everyone can walk away with? I decided to toss the question to many people in the newsroom, both men and women, and I thought that the answer was, it was varied, but also very interesting. So I could go through this. This is what I posed to the newsroom of the New York Times and their responses. If you can go to I have the clicker. Yay. Where did I click it? Which did you? There we go. Yay! It's the first time I used the clicker. Okay, so the question I posed in the newsroom is, what do women need to do to break through gender barriers in the industry? The newsroom feedback fell into 3 categories. There were some people who said, it's not me, it's the men, okay? And then the other answer was, it's the collective solution, that it's not just women that need to take this on, but we need to do it together. And the third response, which was actually the most responses fell into the third category, what can I do now? So a lot of the women were actually saying, well, what can I do personally, and where I'm standing, how can I help break through these barriers? So let's say it's not me, it's men. Looking at men as part of the problem and thus a major factor in coming up with a solution. Don't know if you guys saw this. The New York Times did this piece called The Public Editor, Liz Spade, The Declining Fortunes of Women at the Times. Feel free to grab your phones out right now, Google this piece. And she really looked at the newsroom, and the last 3 years, the New York Times has been going through a lot of changes, like every newsroom has. And one of the things that we've done a really good job at is really taking the time to figure out what's the right approach, how do we keep our news, our integrity, our morals intact, and pushing forward to a more visual, digital newsroom. During these changes, because of these changes, and a lot of people moving in positions, it really had, the public editor took a moment to actually say, what does our newsroom look like? Men accounted for 61% of the bylines that appeared in the front section of the Times last year. This was based on numbers from the Women's Media Center from last year. But at the end of this, and I urge you to read this yourselves, she really said that one of the solutions that she came up with is that because men are the ones with they have the seat at the table, that it's really on them to support women, to make sure that women are getting not only at the table, but getting a voice. And men have the responsibility of making sure that the newsrooms are diverse. And so the Declining Fortunes of Women at the Times, I think, is a great piece that speaks to not just the Times, but journalism as a whole. So it's not me, it's men. And then another interesting, sorry, I don't want to look back here. So let me get this piece, technology. Okay, so Seichi China, she's a breaking news copy editor, which is the desk that I work on. Here's what she had to say. My answer is simple, though not easy and not traditional. In my view, women don't need to do anything. one of the interesting things that she said is, and a lot of the women who responded to this question, they were saying, first of all, make sure your work is solid. There's no point in having a seat at the table if you can't report properly, if you can't write properly. So, it's important to speak up. It's important to get that opportunity, but your work has to be solid. And so she was back saying, look, make sure you don't need to do anything, just be great at what you do first. And so she took really strong points, as you can see. I think there's some young people maybe in here, so maybe I won't read the whole thing. But she really put the onus on men to break down those barriers because we didn't put them up in the first place. And then going on to the next point, it's about the collective. A gentleman wrote in and said, he's also a breaking news copy editor, and he says shaming works, shame the companies into being accountable. He said this approach has worked for other organizations when no company likes bad press. So if you step up there and say, listen, here are the facts, here are the numbers, what are you going to do about that? Shame them into being accountable. And I thought it was really interesting. He said that it's really important to know specifically what it is you're asking for, what is the call to action, and making sure that those companies know exactly what it is they need to do in order to fulfill the needs, not just of the newsroom, but of the people that we speak for. And then the third group is what can I do, which I said the majority of responses came here. A lot of the women decided to take it on themselves and say, what can I do? Yamiche Awasindar, she's a national... Thanks. What can I do? Yamiche Awasindar. I know it's a lot of copy up there, national and politics reporter. She's was out there reporting on all the elections, the wonderful, fun elections. She was out there every day asking those hard questions. She's a tough girl. So I wasn't surprised with her response when she says, at the very beginning, don't back down, really. Just don't be afraid to stand in your truth and ask for the money you deserve and always negotiate. And her point, I think, just goes to if they know that you're a person who's not going to that won't take things lightly, you understand what you deserve, and you are not afraid to ask for that, then I think what she was saying, then everything will follow in line with that. Shreya Sinha, assistant editor of investigations, another woman I really respect at the paper, has this great philosophy of bringing people with her, which we've heard before, right? But I think that concept's a little bit difficult. If you only have one seat at the table, one woman can only carry so many other people with them. So I think it's, again, about that, kind of goes on to the collective still, about more people taking on that responsibility. One person can maybe help 3 or 5, but those people, the ripple effect needs to keep happening. You need to always remember that, carry the torch, not just having the job, but knowing that a part of the job is making sure you're bringing others along with you. And Destiny, and we call her Royal, her name's Royal, imposter syndrome is real. I think this happens a lot with not just women, but people of color. People are from situations where they might not have as many resources, not as much money. Maybe your parents were never journalists before. So you're just feeling a little bit inadequate when you step up to the situation. And she says, if you have a seat at the table, know and stand in your truth that it is yours. It is yours to have. Don't back down. Don't let people shut you up or tell you to stay in your place. Confidence is important, and having that confidence, I think, brings a lot to the table when it comes to, can people trust what you're saying? Can people trust your leadership when you're in that editor position? Because if you don't believe in yourself, other people are not going to believe in you as well. If you don't believe in yourself, it's hard to say, hey, here's this other great woman coming behind me. Believe in them too. So the mindset that you belong in the newsroom is really important. And she also said that it was really important to lay out a plan for your career. I think that when you are one of the few, we might not have the privilege to just lay back and just relax and coast. So it's really important that, to know exactly what you want, to be very clear about your goals, not just with yourself, but also share that with your boss, and to follow up to make sure, are you on track? Is this what we're doing? And I think you should be able to say, like, you have a right to your career, you have a right to your dreams, and you have a right to your career path. And so you shouldn't feel insecure or, oh, is it okay? Am I the only person doing that? Are they going to think this of me? I think you should feel comfortable saying this is what I deserve, and know that, and you should have the work to back that up and the examples to back that up. Another good point that came up when I asked the newsroom was mentorship was really important. I think that sometimes people have one or two mentors, but having very specific mentors for very specific reasons. One might be able to help you on your career path. One might be able to help you to figure out, hey, how to do your makeup, or how to do your clothes, or like what should you wear to the interview, So knowing who to go to for what, and keep going back to that well for that specific reason, but that person might not be able to help you with everything. So having a wealth of resources, a wealth of women who can help you in a variety of ways, I think is really important. So I think these are all ways that, at least from the editors of the New York Times, the reporters of the New York Times, this is their feedback, right, of ways that women can break through gender barriers at the New York
And
Times.
I think the barrier of gender is one, but you touched on some other things, the barriers of race, the barriers of socioeconomic status, the barriers of what we set up in our minds, where we came from and who we are, and do I have the right to be a journalist? I don't come from a family of scholars. I think those are all important things. We're gonna bring in Mindy Marques, because I'd like you to touch on some of this and talk about situations you've observed. So certainly as a leader of a paper, you've observed probably a lot of people that you're managing or under you that have maybe come across some of these uncertainties, but also speak to your challenges with the rise within your career in this context, please.
Well, I tell people now all the time that right now I feel like I live in a bubble because, our organization has 4 women running it, actually 5, including the publisher, who's a Hispanic female, and an African-American female running the editorial board, another Hispanic female running on Level Herald, the Hispanic female is the head of advertising. So I realize that this is not the the rest of the United States of America. This is Miami, and we're probably 10 to 20 years ahead of where everybody else, yeah, sadly. That's very true. So I think, but there are still challenges. I think the biggest challenge really that we all are facing is that our industry is constricting, right? We're not getting bigger, we're getting smaller. And so how do you keep an eye on gender, on diversity, while you're actually not growing that much? So every hire is absolutely precious. Every move that you make is really key. And so I think you have to be very strategic and keep it in mind. From where I sit, and I say this all the time, I really feel, and it's clear in Miami, it makes business sense to have a diverse newsroom, right? I need reporters who speak Creole. I need reporters who speak Portuguese. I need reporters who are African American, who are gay. I mean, because you really cannot cover the community that's diverse if you don't have people who can really understand it and be part of it, and not cover it like what I like to call the foreign correspondent syndrome, where they just pop in and it's like this exotic place, and aren't they fascinating? Mm-hmm. So you can afford to do that if you are popping in from another place, but not when you're covering day to day. So, the other thing I would say is, I would disagree a little bit with the assessment that women don't need to do anything. We just need to let the men get out of the way for 2 reasons. Number one is, 2 men were critical for me in terms of getting my career on path, and I think that Anne referenced somebody who really lifted her. And listen, I had many who also tripped me up, but I can tell you how many women did that as well, which I refer to as the Queen Bee syndrome, which is there can only be one of us, and it's going to be me, and the rest of y'all can't come along. So I think you have to watch for that, the queen bee syndrome, because it's not true that there can only be one seat at the table, otherwise there would just be one guy at the table, and that's not the case either. I love Anne's story is exemplary because she has what I think many of us of our generation lacked, and that was confidence. Talent, first and foremost, but then the confidence. And if you didn't have it, you faked it. And that's what I tell a lot of young women in my newsroom. I'm like, if you are freaking out, go to the bathroom, cry, get yourself together, tell people you have allergies when you come out, but fake it because I think the advantage that men have is that it never occurs to them to outwardly state all the stuff happening in the head. You know, like you're going to get a plum assignment, you say, I can't do that. And like I've never heard a man say that to me, like, oh, I can't possibly handle that assignment. They're like, you know. So I just say, like, just fake it. And so there is something you can do as a woman. I think you have to, in some ways, kind of channel like your husband or your brother or somebody who you pretend like you have the confidence if you don't have it. I think when we're seeing in the newer generation is that a lot of women do have the confidence or they're actually overcoming. The other thing I love about, and a lot of people knock the millennials, but I'm loving the millennial generation because they're going to get this work balance thing fixed. That, you know, they're gonna figure it out because they're not into the indentured servitude that we all signed up for. And the other thing is that they
want to get paid, right?
Yeah, and they also want their time off.
Right.
You know, and so I think that when you look at somebody like, again, Anne, who was like, I'm ready for the next move. But back then, the mentality was, it was almost like hazing. Hey, I had to wait my turn, and it took me 10 years to do this, and it's going to take you 10 years to do that. Well, nowadays, if you've got a really great young journalist, and if you don't kind of give them a stretch pretty quickly, you're going to lose them because they don't have patience. They're not going to wait around 10 years for the next big thing. And so I think that's the thing to be, as a manager, to be aware of who are the people who have a real upside, real potential, and how can you move them into positions of power in your news organization or authority. I mean, I have a 28-year-old who runs my 5 o'clock news meeting, and she is running it, right? And she's telling people, you know, twice her age, like, I need this for tomorrow morning so I can social, I need this, can we get a video? And I think that also helps other younger people in the room to understand that, you know, they do have a seat at the table. And I'm saying younger, but this is a woman, by the way, who runs our afternoon meeting. So I think that helping, if you are in the position to hire, to be really mindful and make sure that at least you have really credible candidates that are diverse, that are women in the mix every time you make a choice, because those hires are getting more and more precious. And number two, to, I think, really give opportunities to people within your organization who sometimes, you know, the mentality is, to your point, if I just do a good job, I'm going to sit here, and somebody's eventually going to notice. And sometimes they do, but a lot of times they don't. So I think also we need to take some responsibility for identifying.
On that point, and Lauren, we're going to bring you in shortly, but Mindy, to you, can you talk a little bit about this piece of taking responsibility within the context of young females? Let's talk a little bit about presentation, how we carry ourselves. So I remember when I started when I was 21, 22, right? Oh, well, you're pretty, so you'll go far in TV. And, you know, comments about dressing. And I worked for a news director once, a female news director, who had all the female talent always wear suit jackets on the air. And there was a deliberate reason for that. She wanted us to be taken seriously and not to be too revealing with our wardrobe. Of course, in a place like Miami, we have a totally different demographic, talking presentation-wise. But talk about young females and the importance with really taking yourself seriously first, and paying attention to how you present yourself as a leader in this industry. What advice would you give young females who aspire to do this and one day achieve all the great awards that you have? Yeah,
I hate to focus on dress, right? Because that's such a female thing. But it really is important, I think, to I always looked at the person whose job I wanted, and I would model how I dressed on how they dress, be it a man or a woman. So, and there's different cultures in different newsrooms, so that, like, I'm sure the dress code is far more casual in Miami. I'm sure New York Times doesn't have a single person showing up in a Hawaiian shirt.
You'd be surprised.
But and that person got talked to, like, please, you might
Don't ever come back.
so
in
you
the
might
flip-flops.
need to go to a funeral. You should not be in a Hawaiian shirt. So I think for that reason, for instance, and I know this sounds ridiculous, but I don't wear jeans on Casual Friday, and and it's not that I just feel like that's not appropriate for me as the editor and I wear because my predecessor never wore jeans, a man, and I just think that there's a certain a line. Now I'm all for the fabulous shoes. To me, it's like, you know what, to me, it's a statement, like the pins that that our former Secretary of State used to wear to really give messages. So I love nothing more than walking in with red shoes.
A little fast.
In a sea of blue and black suits and men. But I do think that just think about where you want to. What's the culture of the place? And look, nothing's worse than that conversation. Like, if any of you in management have ever had to have a conversation with somebody like, please wear a bra to work, like that's like wait, really, I dread those. I try to punt them to other people. So but we should not have to be telling you guys those basic things.
Right.
So I would say just get a pulse of the place. It's, the old, Cuban child. They always tell you it's better to be overdressed than underdressed. So, if you're going to err, be more professional. And then if you realize it's more of a button-down place, casually go down. But you want to project professionalism above all, I think.
And professionalism, you can be professional no matter what your age or how much experience you have.
Exactly.
Or the contrary, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, Lauren, we're going to bring you in on the topic and want to hear sort of your general thoughts. And I'd like you to touch on being a female pushing work in a very serious arena, very serious topic. So sometimes women were given the more, from a journalist perspective, do the feature, do this. So talk about the very serious work that you're a part of and how crucial it is to really go after a vision, especially when it has to do with something so serious and something that has to do with people's lives. Can you?
Okay, so I don't think this is on, is it? I don't think so, but a little bit. Okay, well now I have two.
Now you have two.
There, that's better. So I'll go backwards then, because I was going to tell you something that happened right at the beginning of my career, but I guess I'll start with something that's happened more recently. So as you know, I run the Women Under Siege project, which is about documenting rape and war. It's a journalism project at the Women's Media Center, which was founded by Gloria Steinem, Jane Fonda, and Robin Morgan. And the idea is to make women more visible and powerful in media. In addition to covering rape and war, I'm a columnist at Foreign Policy magazine, so I write about war, refugees, violence, trauma, and I cover some heavy stuff. As you heard, I write for The Atlantic. I've done some extensive work this year for The Guardian. My bylines, they look nice on paper, right? So I was meeting an editor, like an old editor friend of mine, and a friend of his joined us. This was a year or so ago. And we were just out for dinner and we're talking, and I don't know this friend, but he was also one of those guys where as soon as he came into the room, like only talked to the other man there, like wouldn't connect to me. And then suddenly, like an hour in, he just sort of turns to me because I was trying to get in on the conversation and I was talking about a piece I'd done for The Nation or something, and he goes, well, but you're not a journalist. And let me just say, I am in my 40s. This kid was in his mid-20s, right? He's had one job in journalism that he, is very interested in himself about. And I looked at him just as shocked as I could be, and I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Well, you're really an activist." And I said, well, have you ever read any of my work? Have you read the pieces in The Atlantic? Have you, read anything on the Women's Media Center site? And he said, yeah, I have. He said, yeah, but you write about rape. And I said, right. So is there a counterpoint where I should be sort of saying rape is good as well as bad? If I'm saying something about women's rights and it's something about something as horrific as rape, I'm telling you this story because it's the most clear example, but I have been called an activist over and over by men because they think that you're kind of one-sided. You know what I mean? First of all, you're doing something on women, and while it's hard stuff on women, it's not the pink issues, the soft issues, or whatever you want to call it, and belittle those beats, which is ridiculous in itself in this day and age. But again, like, I couldn't even be considered a hard-hitting journalist. So what I always say back to people now who tell me that is, I've been around these hardcore war photographers. I work in Congo, a fair amount. And those guys who are maybe photographing child soldiers, they're not called activists, right? But their work is making a strong statement about the horrific nature of recruiting children as soldiers. So I say, you're not calling like that guy an activist. Like, why would you call a woman who's reported writing, about something like rape? Why would you call her an activist? So, just to start off there, yeah, thanks. But just, I was actually going to start off with one other story about the first story I ever did and what happened to me. So I was in my late 20s. I was new to journalism. I was having that kind of like fake it till you make it feeling, but also like constant terror of like picking up the phone and calling anyone. I didn't even know why I'd gotten into the industry. I didn't know how to talk to strangers. It was terrifying. So for God knows what reason, I pitched a story to the New York Times and they took it. So this was going to be my first print story. And that is a little frightening, So it was, and I have no shame now saying who this was and where this was, because this was many years ago. But it was a story about the Flatiron Building, and there had been a sculpture stolen off the top of the building, or missing, and no one knew what had happened to it. And I met the artist who was replacing it. So I was following her work, and I was writing this nice little piece for the Times about, what happened to the sculpture? We don't know, and I'm trying to find out. And I went to the Flatiron, and I think he was the manager of the building, and I hope he's not there anymore, but he took me down into his office in the basement and shut the doors. There's no windows, it's dark, and the walls are covered in Playboy pinups. Yeah, and I was just like, and like, while I wasn't as young as some of you maybe, I still felt young, inexperienced, a woman, young woman, and I felt intimidated. And then the first thing he says to me on this kind of like non-hard-hitting story is, you're gonna need to tell me everyone you've spoken to and give me a list of the questions you've given them and give me their answers. And I was like, what? But at the time I was like, what? Am I supposed to do that? He's like, I've worked with the Times for years, the Post, the Daily News, and this is protocol. I didn't know, and I looked at him, I said, well, I really, there's really no reason for that, and I'm not gonna do that. And he started yelling, and he kept going, and I just wanted to get out of there at that point. And I felt intimidated and scared, and there are naked ladies on the walls, and clearly this man has some sort of problem with women, right? Mm-hmm. I finally, I'm shaking, and I finally get out of there, and the first thing I did, I was in J school part-time, I call my editor, my professor, and she said, you did the right thing. Oh, the last thing he said to me was, I'm calling your editor as soon as you leave, which, is really upsetting. You're on your first big story. My professor said, you did the right thing. Now go call your editor, tell her what happened. It was a woman. She said, I totally get it, moving on, don't worry about it. So that was the beginning of my career. And it's gotten a lot easier, like some people have said. I think you said, Anne, that you become more confident making your choices. You become stronger in your convictions. You start to know what you're doing more as you go along, so you don't put up with that crap as you get older. But what I wanted to do is give you some of the statistics that we at the Women's Media Center have gathered, because they're powerful. Every year we come out with a report called The Status of Women in Media. And actually, it was in Rochelle's first slide there in that story. So I want to just give you some of the stats to give you an idea of what we're up against as women in this industry. And wait, first can I ask, I may have missed this because I was in traffic, so I missed the beginning of the opening. How many of you are working as journalists? Oh, a bunch of you. And how many are students hoping to be journalists? Okay, so like most of this room. Okay, so this is what you're kind of walking into. The Women's Media Center's annual examination we do every year at the top 20 news outlets, which is broadcast, online, and newspapers, and I can give you those if you want. Men produced 62% of all the reports. In the broadcast sector alone, work by women anchors, field reporters, and correspondents declined this year, falling to 25% of reports in 2016. It was 32% actually in 2015, so something has shifted. Women accounted for more than a third of editors that are aligned with the Association of Newspaper Editors, ASNE, and there are more women employed at online-only sites than newspapers. Just a note about race. Whites made up 83% of the overall workforce among the people who responded within the American Society of Newspaper Editors. Overall, men report 62% of the news in print. The New York Times, as Rochelle mentioned, it's 61% men were doing in the bylines. And what's interesting is that it's 39% of women doing bylines, but it's up from 32% the year before. So the Times is making efforts, as are places like where I work at Foreign Policy. They've recruited various columnists who are women. The Nation magazine called me and asked me, who can we recruit as women? Like, they're trying, and I think that's a really good sign, right? Just back to broadcast news, men report 75% of it. And overall, online, men receive 54% of bylines. So we're doing pretty well online as women. But what I wanted to talk about is that this actually has a lot to do with coverage. What we as consumers of news read, what we as people who are sources for the news give. It really shifts the coverage, who's doing the reporting. So in terms of our study, we found that men produced mostly stories on sports, weather, crime, and justice. Women are largely reporting on lifestyle, health, and education news. Which, I'm not going to belittle, like, those are important issues as well. But the question is, are they being shunted into those roles? Are editors telling them to do those things? Or is this what they actually want to be doing? I don't know. The other thing is, since I write about rape, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about the data around that and what that means. Federal data show that 90% of reported rape and sexual assault victims are female. But we found that male reporters were more likely to cover such cases and more likely to publish quotes about the impact of rape on the alleged perpetrator rather than the victim. Yeah. So all this means that what the public consumes is heavily produced by males, even something that affects women mostly, like rape. Men also turn more often to male sources, which, if you're having more men writing more stories and talking to more men, it's men, men. There's also, I don't want to get into the pay gap, you all know it's there, but what I wanted to say also is there's also a prize gap in terms of the Pulitzers. Women have won 14% of a century's worth of Pulitzer prizes. 14. Also, there's an award recently that I was taking a poke around and discovered that only in 8 years, one woman has won. And I contacted them and I said, I somehow just don't believe it. I don't know why only one woman would win in 8 years. And the response was very polite and said, we really take diversity into account and we really care about these things. And actually there was another woman, she was part of a team another year. I mean, that to me was like, oh, okay. So you're 1/4 okay instead of 1/8. It's not really so great. And also, are you really taking it into account if you're giving men 7 out of 8 times? I don't think you are. But I wanted to end on a positive note. So while I've kind of grown up, like many of us here, in the tradition of male newsrooms, and I can name the place where men would sort of pop up like gophers every time I walk by from their cubicles, and the place where I worked for years where the boss only talked to my breasts, and the place where I also worked for years and was told, I was very proud of that job, and then told after that by one of my bosses that I was hired because I was the cutest applicant, which really, really upset me and still does. what I managed to do was find a cohort of women journalists who are my team and my friends and my support, and we all cover things like war and trauma. So we talk to each other almost every day. You know, I'm having some PTSD from that last trip I took, and we support each other. I just had this garbage happen with this male editor. For instance, I once pitched a story about, I was in Guatemala, I pitched a story to a major magazine, I knew the editor, and I said, I want to write a story about this thing about rape in Guatemala. He said, I'm sorry, I can't take it because last month we did a story about women in Honduras. That's what we're up against. But I will say, my team of women who are just, it's an informal network that I've created, have gotten me through years of this stuff. You know, and I really want to emphasize how important that is, that you find your tribe, because men already have it. You know, like that's what the news business is. They, you know, in corporate America, men go golfing and women don't necessarily do those things. You always hear about that, how women are left out. But the same thing happens in journalism. And I think if you find your group, you can support each other, build each other up, and again, you know, bring each other along. And I too have had women try to shoot me down along the way, but it is not the majority in my experience, and you find the ones who are going to make you feel that you're being lifted up and you're lifting them up.
So, Lauren, you touched on something that I wanted to get into next. This really is a craft, right? So we learn from those who have done, we perfect by, you know, finding our own way, but it really is a skill set and a craft that's passed down in a sense. So there is the necessity to have that informal network of colleagues and teachers, unspoken teachers that guide us through. I too have had some negative experiences with male bosses. I've had more female news directors actually in my career than male news directors. I've also had some positive experiences with male leaders in my newsrooms. What I found, and I'd like to start with you, Lauren, is that the tough lessons that have come from the women or the women that have tried to do the cut, they hurt more than the ones that come from the men.
Agreed.
I'd like to get your insight on that.
Yeah, it sucks.
It sucks all around.
You know, I love mentoring young journalists, and when I find that an older female journalist does something nasty to me, I'm always shocked. Maybe I'm just like a kitten still. I don't know. I'm kind of like, why are you hurting me? Like, I don't get it. But I also will say I've had men who have taught me like miraculous things, and some male bosses have been amazing. But I will also say, working at the Women's Media Center now, which is all women, that has been remarkable. I realize I never really had women mentors in my entire career or life. And now I work with women. I have mentors like Gloria Steinem. I have, you know, which is kind of the ultimate female mentor. But I've learned that there's a way to do things among supportive women and without that kind of male thing that happens where you're in a room and you say something and then a few minutes go by and nobody really acknowledges it, and then a man says the same thing and then everyone's like, oh, that's a good idea. You know? So I don't have to deal with that anymore. So I recommend working with all women, but not that that's going to happen for most of you, but yeah.
Mindy, if you want to weigh in on that.
No, it's funny. I see Ana Menendez in the crowd, and so I won't name the editor, but we both had this person, and it was a woman, and I remember that I must have been my second or third year as a reporter at the Miami Herald, and she took me out to lunch, and I was getting a rather pedestrian raise, and I said, well, you know, that doesn't seem like a lot of money, and can you do a little better? She goes, well, the way they see it, your husband is a doctor. And which, by the way, he's not. He's a physician assistant, and which was still not. But my point is, and I was like, well, my husband doesn't work here. So let me just say that, you know, equal opportunity. You know, keep the young ones down. I've had also women to lift me. I think, in some ways, I think many of us feel that. Look, I think there's equal responsibility, and for men and women to lift the talent and lift people in the room who have a diversity of opinion, who bring diverse, diverse thoughts and skills. I think the reason that it's worse when it's a woman is because you would like to think that there is a sense of camaraderie, or that there's a sense of sharing in this same struggle. And I think that it would be a mistake to take that for granted, given, some of our past experience. And I think you said this, and it's critical. The reality is that men still hold the bulk of the power in a lot of these news organizations. And so we need men, and a great example is like there, Mr. Virgil, who spent a career lifting, at lifting people and promoting women and people of color. And so if you don't have those folks doing that, then we're not going to get all the way there. So it really is not, I think, you don't want to create like this gender war. You need the women who have the ability, who finally have a seat at the table, to reach back and pull up. And then you need the men who have wives and sisters and daughters to do the same as well. Recognize, above all, you have to have the talent. Nobody, and I'm sorry, I'm very strict about that too. Like, I am not going to, this is not charity, and I'm not doing anybody any favors, including somebody who's not very good in promoting them. And plus, my reputation is that line. So I know this sounds harsh, but at the very basic, you have to be really good, and you may have to be great, quite frankly, compared to. So just accept that you're going to have to be really, really good, do your best, be super professional, but then give somebody else a hand, I think, is what I would say.
So dealing with, and Rochelle, we'll start with you, but dealing with, we're going to segue to another topic, dealing with the reporters in your newsroom, so whatever your relationship may be with them, or managing or working with other women on projects, do you think that there is something to be said about the young female talents who take on maybe the grittier assignments? Do you think that as leaders, as editors, as the people looking at the copy, looking at the story pitches, that you have the respect for the females who say, I want to cover that story. I want to cover the rape series. I want to do a story on, undocumented immigrants crossing the border. Do you think that there's more respect there for the young women who step up and say, this is what I want to do? I don't want to cover the, I forgot how you put it, Lauren, but the more, the pink assignments.
Flowers and fashion
The
shows.
flowers and the fashion
It used to be
shows.
known as that. But,
Yeah.
Oh, as a copy editor, often I get the story that has already been assigned. And it's about to go into print, it's about to go online. So I'm at that point now where, the decisions have already been made. However, one of the things that I think does happen a lot in newsrooms is that when you're pitching a story, it's very important to find the right person to pitch it to. And this happens with people of color. And we just recently started a race-related newsletter, which came about because people were trying to pitch stories that necessarily didn't really have a place. Or didn't really have a place within the I don't want to say within the newsroom, but certain pitches weren't sticking. And so, and after a lot of the shootings were happening, we said, there really is something here that we need to talk about. Let's discover it. So the newsroom took the time to dedicate a few reporters to covering race in America. And that beat is doing very well. We've also taken the time to come up with someone who's just dedicated to covering gender in today. What does gender look like today? So I really... One of the great things about the Times right now is that we really are trying to tackle these issues and trying to find ways to integrate those stories within the newsroom. But what we have found is that I think because of these new beats that we're coming up with, is that it's really important to dedicate editors to committing editors to covering these types of stories. When a woman comes up and says, hey, we need to cover rape, but then some other breaking news issue comes out that maybe the men editors think is more important, or there are more readers or more interest to that, sometimes stories do fall on deaf ears, unfortunately. But yeah, so I'm not in the position right where I'm actually okaying the articles, but that is really like the tone of the newsroom right now.
Okay, how about, Mindy, did you want to weigh in on this?
No, I mean, I that's an interesting. I think it's an interesting question. I think it's a difference between beats and story selection. I do. Rochelle raises a really excellent point, which is that, you know, you want the diversity of opinion because you want stories that you wouldn't otherwise think about because it's not your reality, and so you have to be really sensitive to that. And I think that that's where you could get some really fantastic stories. And I will tell you, so for instance, when we had a really horrible case here a couple years back where a man on something, we don't know, but anyway, he crossed, it was right by the Miami Herald building, he crossed the causeway and he attacked a homeless man and he killed, it was, you know, we call it was, you know, the Miami zombie, the face eater, you guys know what I'm talking about. That story went like worldwide. The man that was an attacker was Haitian American, and we had a reporter who was Haitian American assigned to the story. And we got a story that I think we would have never gotten had she not been the reporter, and that was that because she understood the culture, obviously spoke the language, and it turned out that no funeral home wanted to bury him because they thought he was possessed, and that's, you know, part of some of the religious, cultural voodoo background. But she did that story. See, in the wrong hands, that story could be like a very mangled, you know, piece of, you know, right? And she really did it with nuance and I think texture because she understood it, so it was not. And that's the kind of thing that you get when I think you listen to other voices. And I think also on the beats question, like you will post a beat, and I was thinking about like, so Anne wanted the education beat, right? And I just thought about like, well, I just promoted a young woman into the education beat. She applied for that job. Is that some self-selection, or is it just actually it's a pretty good beat? It turns out it impacts tons of people. So I think on that end, right, you open it up to the room and who applies and who doesn't apply. I think we have to be careful that we don't limit ourselves to beats that we think perhaps are, you know, women. But I like to think we're beyond that. I'm not sure that we are, but.
So, Lauren, your statistics, because I want to get to that before we go to the questions, they were interesting, and I'd like to hear what our other panelists think about them. But they got me thinking about something, and kind of reflecting when I was hearing this, and just in the context of this conversation, I can say honestly that there have been several times in my career, and there continue to be, where I've been asked to take on roles or to do cover certain stories, or to take on a certain role for a certain type of newscast or a role within a newscast that maybe doesn't go in line with the journalist that I really want to be with the end goal. But I have said yes because I have understood that I'm wanted for a particular reason. Sometimes it has to do with gender, sometimes it has to do with other things. Obviously television, like you're dealing with demos and stuff. But I have said yes, even though I really wanted to say, you know, well, I'd rather be on the investigative team. And I can admit that, and I'm not afraid to admit that, because that is a reality that we deal with. When we look at these statistics, do you think that, and that's, you know, my personal honesty and my personal account, and I know other females that I've talked to in confidence that do this work that have felt the same way, do you think we're putting ourselves within the framework of these statistics, or do you think they're being put on us?
You know, as I said, I really don't know. I don't know how much is self-selection versus like women have more interest in certain issues. But just also adding on what everyone's been just said, the idea and in the selection of kind of stories, I don't have more admiration for people who cover like hard versus, you know, hard meaning like trauma stories versus not. I mean, you should see the total jerks who do some of this reporting. The men who do some of this reporting are all about, you know, the guns and the bombs and like, it's very cool and they get to be tough. And like, I don't have respect for that. Like, I have respect for talent and how you cover that story and how you do it sensitively and with nuance. And, you know, men can do a rape story just as well as women in some cases. The other thing I will say is that women, in a really positive way, have access to certain stories that men don't. And when it comes to kind of like war and refugee situations, you know, think about the cultures you're dealing with. If it's an Arab culture, perhaps, you have more access to women because men can't go into a tent and talk with women. And at the same time, as a woman, I've been given access to the men. So men can't do both. Like, women get to do both. But I don't know the answer to that question about self-selection. I just know that from our statistics, it shows that whoever's covering it is influencing the way the coverage is being done. And that's important to recognize, at least.
Rochelle or Mindy,
Yeah.
can you weigh in on the stats? Yeah.
You know, I was graduating college. One of the things that I was like, oh, I want to be a magazine reporter covering features, and you know, some people might call it some of the stuff that I was very interested in. They might have called it fluff. But hey, that's what I at that time, that was relevant to me when I looked at it news and I saw issues that were speaking to women and whatever the topics were. Hey, that's where my eyes were drawn to, and my heart was drawn to. And now that, you know, my career has, you know, been all over the place. And now that I'm at the Times, the questions, the conversations I have with my bosses is that I love covering stories about people who are the outcasts and the underdogs. I love covering stories about the minorities. And so there's a difference between becoming a statistic, you know, being pigeonholed into something, and knowing your strengths. And I feel very comfortable going to my boss saying, give me the stories about women. I look at that paper and I look, oh, they're talking about Serena Williams, or they're covering a profile on a woman. I'm going to read this and make sure they're not mentioning her age next to, oh, she just got married. Or just all the other men, their ages aren't mentioned, but we're mentioning, oh, her age, and saying, oh, she's an older athlete. These things happen a lot, and they're not intentional. I'm sure if I was writing a story about, you know, men and football or something, which isn't my strength, I'd probably throw some really bad stuff in there, you know? Like, it's just not what I do. I can, but I'm gonna have some. I'm gonna have some football pros, you know, read it and just say, hey, does it pass? So I make sure that I'm holding people accountable. I want to do good by all those other people who don't have that seat to read the story. Let's not look stupid. And then also one of the stories that I also have to pay attention to is every time there's Miami. I'm like, oh my God, so South Beach and Miami Beach are two different things here. And so I think that it's okay to step up and know the difference as a woman. There's a difference between being the statistic and a strength, and I think it's okay to work to those, play up those strengths. I mean, that's what I'd just like to add to that.
Yeah, and Mindy, you talked about kind of having a different situation with a lot of female leaders in your newsroom, and I think that the point is that it's not that we don't want to be female or we don't want to be feminine. We also have to embrace what we are, and maybe as mothers or as grandmothers or as aunts, we have a different perspective than a male, and that's also okay too, to embrace what we do have, right?
Yeah.
I'd like to open it up to the floor for questions. Anybody want to start? We want you to introduce yourself. Just come up to the microphone here at the front. And the tech guys are asking me to tell you, please speak into the microphone. Questions? Don't all jump up here at once. Okay. There we go.
Pretty loud, so I don't know that it's going to be that necessary, but is it on?
Yes.
Okay, so your comment just now regarding how we want to own that we're women. We don't want to forget that we're women. So a few years back, there was a big report about a female reporter wanting to go into the men's locker room and do a big story on them. So it was like, do we allow women in the men's locker room? So I guess my question is, do we do more damage to ourselves when we're trying to put ourselves in situations where truly we shouldn't be? Like, I don't agree that a woman belongs in a men's locker room, that we want to cover the story, that's different. But do we do more damage to ourselves in those situations?
I'm just going to go with the fact that was that the really the only way to cover the story, or was that just sort of a sensationalist way to get coverage? I don't know.
I guess that's a good point. That's the point.
But I also think, I mean, I'm sorry, I'm biased toward print. I think broadcast sometimes does things that I disagree with. Like I said, I think women have particular access, and I've pushed those boundaries on purpose, but I will not, walk into a mosque and try to get into the prayer room while men are praying, because that's inappropriate and culturally obnoxious, like you don't want to offend your sources. I just wonder, you want to do everything you can to get the story, but do you have to break down the walls in some sort of inappropriate way to do it? Probably not,
Okay. And so then the other question would be how to actually talk yourself out of that feeling of, okay, they're going to know I'm fake now. Because I deal a lot with high net worth individuals, and 90% of my clients are men. So a lot of times when I'm talking to them, I'm wondering, are they going to figure it out any minute that they shouldn't be talking to me because I'm a fake? So it's that constant fear in my mind, though I know I'm qualified to speak to them. I know that I have what it takes, but I'm constantly second guessing myself. So what would you suggest would be a good...
I did something at the Women's Media Center called Progressive Women's Voices, and it trains you how to speak on television and do interviews, and kind of basically the point is to own your expertise. And I didn't even know I wasn't owning my expertise. I didn't know I had expertise. It was just really eye-opening. And what the trainer said to us was, men go on television as pundits and they're asked, about the Venezuela currency crisis. And they don't know anything, but they'll offer an opinion. They have no problem. And not that you should be spouting off on any kind of topic, but at the same time, you have expertise. You have an opinion, you read, you're in journalism, you know what's going on basically, so go with that and know that men do that just instinctively. They're taught that by society. I think we need to tell each other as women, we have that too. We can do that.
I would just add, you may not be able to, I wish I could tell you, my head still does, I can still do that. I wish I could tell you it doesn't. Just don't say it out loud, for God's sake. That's the thing. Just don't say it out loud. At least not, you can tell it to a friend or, call your significant other. But I think the worst thing is to express it out loud, because why give somebody a reason to doubt you that may already have a reason to doubt you? So I remember a young female intern that I had who was an only daughter and raised by a really strong, her father was really raising her almost like a guy, and one of the great things was that he told her don't tell your enemies, you don't it's almost like a war tactic, you don't tell your enemies your weakness. So I thought, what, that's pretty good advice.
Yeah.
Just don't say it.
Yeah, that's the
Can
struggle,
I-
is constantly making sure that I look the part and act the part, because I'm always, in my head, I'm telling myself this. I know they don't see it because what's coming out of my mouth is totally different than what's in the back of my head, trying to
But
break
can
me
I also
down.
offer something that my favorite thing about journalism is that I usually don't know as much as my sources know, which is why I'm interviewing them, so they can tell me what the situation is, what's going on. And if you kind of approach it that way of I don't know, I'm so interested in what you have to say, you're learning, they're not questioning how dumb or smart you are, because you know what, people love to talk about themselves.
That's
Give them the rope and let them go with it,
That's true too.
But
haven't-
you belong there. I feel for people who are questioning their place. When you're doing your job, you belong there. No one else is more deserving of that position than you. That's why you're there. And guess what? If you make a mistake, you make a mistake. We all make mistakes. And in that moment, I think you should just allow yourself to give it your all. I think the worst thing, for me, the worst thing that I can do is look back at something and say, oh man, I didn't give it my all. Or, I was doubting myself. Or if I made a mistake, when I make a mistake because I wasn't giving it my all, I am more upset at myself than if I gave it my all and I made a mistake. So I would, this isn't journalism advice, this is me, Super Soul Sunday own fan. Give yourself the freedom to be who you are, and also know that you belong where you are as well, and just stand in that. And if you make a mistake, hey, sorry about that, move on. And then forgive yourself when you do make a mistake. Don't be standing there being like, you remember the last time you did this and you stumbled over your words, and just let it go. You're in it. It's a new day, new question. Move forward in that, and forgive yourself when you make a mistake. All right? Like that's. I don't know if that helps.
Are you offering like lessons?
So
I am such a Super Soul Sunday fan. I will go there many times. I apologize. It's gonna keep coming up.
okay, so we're gonna keep the questions going. So next, please.
When you know that you deserve your position and you have to put somebody in their place, either a woman or man, and the woman or man decide to turn back at you and say, oh, you're bossy, or, why are you doing this? How would you respond to that?
I've had that happen.
Have I?
I have definitely had that happen. Most of the time, I have to catch myself because I feel like I can be brusque when I'm editing. I can just say, this is what I need, this is what I need you to change, do it, do it, do it. And then I've had to catch myself and be like, this is a great piece. And I need you to change this, and just learn to soften a little because I know how it can come across now. But I did run into this years ago. I was editing a guy over and over during a breaking news crisis halfway across the world. So it went on for like a year, and he just hated me. He did not want to take any of my edits. He didn't, and I was above him. I was his editor, and we just kind of battled, and I finally lost it. And I don't speak to the people who work for me rudely. I mean, I really don't. And I just lost it, and I said, I'm sorry, but this is the job. You're either gonna do it, or go work somewhere else because I can't. Like, that's it. You just sometimes have to put your foot down and know that what you're doing is the right thing and valuable. And if it's, usually a man who's pushing back against you, oh, well for them, right?
Yeah, thank you.
Say, sorry, if I can add to that, just some stuff happened recently. Pick and choose your battles. Okay, I think, every day you can go in there and find a lot of things that people are saying that can upset you, and you really have to pick and choose based on what's really important to you. Is your reputation on the line? Is this more about them? Is this about you? Recently, I was in a situation where there was an article that was going up, and the photo that we were using, I really disagreed with the photo. I voiced my opinion to the photo editor and said, hey, here's what I'm thinking. Maybe there's something else that we could use. And unfortunately, he was really offended that, I'm not a photo editor. And I was, it seemed to him that I was really stepping on his toes. And so I said, okay, this isn't going to be, if I keep going back and forth with him, it's not going to be good for either of us. So I went to another photo editor in the newsroom, and I also went to the news desk, and I said, hey, here's what I'm thinking. What are your thoughts? If you guys are okay with this, we'll let it go. Like, it's perfectly fine. Mine is just, one opinion among many. And this is a big institution. And they said, you know what, we see your point. The photo editor said, yeah, you're right. Let me go back to him and talk to him. So a photo editor to photo editor, they could talk their language. It was taking some time, still didn't change, so I called him up again and said, hey, what's going on? He was pushing back some more. And I said, listen, I'm going to run with the story, but we're going to fix this later, because it was breaking news, I needed to get up. And so we got it up, and I was still doing some work in the back end. We ended up changing the photo. Yeah. It changed. But afterwards, he was really upset. He started yelling at me. I let it go because the story needed to get up. Let's do it. But 5-10 minutes later, I called him back. I said, listen, I didn't like the way you were speaking to me. I just want you to know that. We're both here. I understand that you're trying to do your job. I'm doing my job. We're all here to do this job at the New York Times. It's not about us. It's about the Times. and it's about doing the best thing for this piece. And that's basically it. And I said, don't shoot the messenger here, all right? But I found that it was really important because it was an initial interaction with this gentleman. I needed to let him know that he can't treat me that way the next time we interact. But so that was important for me to let him know that. But my strategy in getting there was to also get other people to have my back and to have them weighing in saying, you know what, Rochelle brought this up and we agree with her. So it wasn't just me going up against him. This was, hey, this is about journalism. This is about serving the paper. I tossed it out to a few other people. We brainstormed it. We workshopped it. And this is what we have to say. But it was also about saying, here are some other options. Here are some other reasons why we think it needs to change. So it wasn't about opinions. It wasn't about personalities. It was about serving the paper. And so I think that sometimes when you're in those conflicts, that you can just, everyone I think is there to do the job. Everyone's trying to feed their families, feed themselves, help out their own careers. So I think you can always be eye to eye with someone on that level and then try to move forward by backing it up with journalism and hopefully getting other advocates with you along the way. Hope that helps.
She is
Thank
much
you.
nicer than I am. That's what you're learning.
Other questions? Yes. You can come up. If you have a question, we can just kind of form, because we want to get through them all and we have a little more time. Go ahead, sir.
Greetings, ladies. So my question is on behalf of one of my clients who called me yesterday, and she asked me this question. She works for a large media company. She is 8 years into her career. She is being recruited heavily by another media company into a role that she has coveted for a long time. The question is, she's pregnant. And so her question is, at what point, she's in her first trimester, so she's not showing. At what point do I tell the male interviewers that I'm pregnant? Do I tell them at all? And what impact do you think it'll have on me getting the job?
They're shaking
Everyone's
their heads
saying no.
Yeah.
No way.
You have kids, right?
Yeah.
I don't have kids.
So her concern with that suggestion is that she's not being transparent and she's taking the job knowing that she has a situation. So she feels like she's taking advantage of the employer.
I would say it's really tricky. I mean, first of all, I interviewed with the Washington Post, and I was big as a house. So I actually was wondering, like, wow, well, you couldn't hide it. I was 7 months. It looked like Jabba the Hutt. So, but that's really different. I think, first of all, I don't think any woman, would ever disclose a pregnancy in that very sensitive first trimester where things can happen. So I don't think she's under any obligation to really, at that point. I do see the conflict because really your employer needs to know that you're going to be, you're going to take maternity leave and you're going to want to be off. And they need to be okay with that. And I think you want to work for a place that is going to be okay with the fact that, hey, when I am going to come and I'm going to, she took a big job when she was pregnant. But it's tricky because of where she's at in the pregnancy. I think once, you're showing or whatever, it's pretty out there. But it's the things but it's true. A man would never have to disclose, hey, my wife's pregnant. I'm going to need some paternity time down the road. But boy, I don't think I would early on.
But I love what you just said. Like, maybe she wants to think about, does she want to work for a place that isn't going to be okay with that?
Yes.
And if I remember correctly, I'm so sorry to be, yes.
Reference, right? I was pregnant when I took over digital.
Yes.
Yeah, so,
We used to work together at the Sun Sentinel many years ago.
So, yes. So, child number one was that first anecdote. And then child number two, with Veronica, I learned I was pregnant in January of 2009. And that was after a year of several miscarriages. And so we learned we were pregnant, and I wasn't, counting my chickens before they hatched at that point. And it was about February that I was approached about taking over sunsentinel.com in the digital. And at the time, when I was asked, my first concern was, oh, I don't know anything about digital. But then, after that settled in, I'm thinking, I'm having absolutely that question of, well, do I let them know? How do I let them know? When do I let them know? I mean, this is a big job. They expect a lot, how and when. And so, and to make matters worse, the person who ultimately hired me for the job left right before it was Jeff Levine, if you remember.
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
he left right before I took over the job. So I had to tell the new person coming in the news. And so that was a shock. She was a woman, and she, fortunately was, took it in stride. But yeah, that was a real sensitive time, and I didn't know how to handle it. And, I had some episodes before then, so I certainly wasn't going to announce it before it was time. And I was fortunate that I laid out a plan for what we would do. So by the time we had the conversation, I had gotten, into that second trimester, and we laid out a plan for what will we do in the fall when the time comes. Who's going to take over? How will that handle? When will you come back? How will it come? And we figured all those out, all those terms out beforehand, and that really helped.
Thank you for that. Other questions? Yes. Yeah. Right.
I wouldn't have weighed her pregnancy in my decision, but maybe other people who were choosing with me could have done that. So I'm glad that she never said it, because I know that she's the best person for the job.
So you understood her perspective in not, even though you didn't necessarily agree with it when you learned, yeah.
Now I'm just absolutely happy that she was the person
That you chose, yeah. Go ahead.
So I'm Susanna Rose. I'm the Associate Provost for the newly established Office to Advance Women Equity and Diversity at FIU. I'm glad to be here. But I just want to make a comment that there are legal protections for pregnant women, and they cannot ask if you're pregnant, and you have no obligation to tell them if you're pregnant. That's right. And you should not tell them.
Yeah.
Those legal protections, like all our other ones, aren't rolled back this year.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Yes?
Hi. I want to go back to the where do we go from here. I want to give a little background and kind of see where I'm coming from. I'm a proud graduate of the FIU School of Communications. They used to call it Communications Technology back then. My most recent job was Director of Community Relations for Miami-Dade County. I just retired in January. One of the things that I noticed early in my career and throughout with journalists is that they hire people from the Ivy League, that people from upper middle class and wealthy backgrounds are always first. And perhaps that's because they're viewed as having a better education or more qualifications. And I think that has a lot to do with our lack of diversity in the newsroom. And I wanted to ask what you all think can be done, and what are you going to do about really looking, especially with an institution like FIU, where in my day, and I'm sure now, this was an opportunity that many of us had who would have never gone to college. And as you know, in this community, our communities run, half the people that run Miami-Dade County went to Miami-Dade College and FIU. And so what can we do about making sure that students from backgrounds that aren't upper middle class, et cetera, are getting a chance in journalism and all?
Yeah. Good question.
As someone who went to those fancy schools, I did not come from a wealthy background, and I will be paying student loans for the rest of my life. But I will say going to Columbia Journalism School did get me, the next thing, which then got me the next thing. I mean, that's how, yeah, you're right. It works like that. Agreed. But as someone who hires people, mostly I bring in interns at this point. I always sort of thought that that's what I would do, and I think I did do that earlier in my career when I was in a position to take someone on. I looked at, oh, well, they went to, fancy school X. Yeah, they probably have a good education, and they had this fancy internship. But now, you're right, it works that way. Once you have the one fancy thing, you got the next fancy thing. And like, it just, proliferates. But I do know that I realized a couple of years ago, as I was trying to bring on a couple new interns, I was looking at so many resumes, and I saw the fancy schools, and then I saw the schools like I didn't know much about or hadn't heard of, but I really didn't pay attention to them suddenly. I was looking at their clips. I was looking at where have they written, what have they written, what are they covering, what are their interests? And if you see that they're achieving and they're doing great work, I realized that that mattered more to me, and I've stopped looking at schools. So I don't know if this goes on in other newsrooms, but I just think it's like it was an evolution of just working with so many people over so many years that I realized it didn't matter where the hell they went to school, because so much of it is about socioeconomics and who your daddy was and all that. So.
Right.
I think we really, first of all, we have 2 internships. We have a summer internship that's really competitive, and we do go to Columbia, we go to University of Florida, we go to Missouri, we have, kids from U.S. And then we have a year-long, 2 semesters FIU specific internship that's really working in the newsroom for 2 semesters, covering a city. And so I feel that that's really helped us to really diversify our pool. We've always really been about like, what have you done? Because we have had, in the past, I think we had, I don't know, the other decade, I think there was people who would go and court the Yales and the Princetons and whatever, and then, they couldn't write. So, I mean, at least not a straight news story, right? Because they didn't. So we really, really put a premium on like what they've done and what experience they have. And I think that we also put a premium on, again, because we're looking for kids who can reflect this community. We love kids who are from here. We love, we look for the skill sets, like, language, et cetera. So I think that in some ways really changes the way that you look at the entire group. I mean, but we do also get a range.
So we have another question.
If I can answer that one too,
Okay,
a little
yeah,
bit. I'll try to do this quickly. I'm a graduate of FIU. My parents were immigrants. I wasn't born here myself, had to become a U.S. citizen. I had 5 internships before I graduated here, in several different platforms. I think I even had more internships actually. That's really important. When you don't have the leg up, when you don't have so-and-so's a publisher, and my dad can call my friend he goes to golf with. Okay, I didn't have that. But there were internship opportunities. My first interaction with the New York Times was with the New York Times Institute, the Student Institute, which is specifically geared toward getting women, people of color, and Hispanics into the newsroom. That was 2007, and they stayed in touch with me until they hired me in 2014. The same person who started that institute. Alan Richards is the one who helped, and Dr. Kopenhaver, you brought the institute here, and they stayed in touch with me that entire time and brought me into the New York Times. I wouldn't be at the New York Times today if it wasn't for the institute. I wouldn't be at the New York Times today if it wasn't for the internships I had done. I did the work. I made those contacts. I found the networks that I needed, and I kept in touch with those people. I had them review my work. I said, what are the problems? Be honest with me. Give me your feedback. How could this be better? I tried to get the Ivy League experience, I guess, that the Ivy League had or something like that. I don't know what I was missing, but I wanted to make sure that when I applied for the job, I wasn't missing anything. You could not say no to me. That was my attitude. And Mindy, you said earlier that sometimes you can't just be good, you have to be great. And so if you want, so it's very important that as people who don't have the connections yet, that you have to be more than good, you have to be great. You have to work harder at making those connections, making those allies, getting those advocates in order. But you asked, you're saying, what will we do? What will we do? The newsroom, like the New York Times, does have diversity institutes. A lot of newsrooms, a lot of communication companies do have programs to help people get into the newsroom. I think it's very important, and they have those. So I think it's very important to get in on those early, even if you're not in college, to get to know those people who are a part of the diversity hiring, and understand what is it they're looking for, and how can I present myself so that I am right for this job.
Okay, thank you, Rochelle. We have one more question that we want to include before we close out the morning. Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
I feel I should apologize for coming up again, but I do have a very important question for all of the panelists and also the moderator, because I come from a different era. I come from the Gloria Steinem era, and when I entered the field of journalism, there were not very many women in it, and so I'm so impressed that today there are many more women, even though we're talking about breaking barriers. And I come from a time when, Newsweek only hired fact checkers, and my peers were the ones in the lawsuit that stopped that and made a big jump. But I still see today people like all over the journalistic world just below that level, that ceiling. I see Jill Abraham, well, I hate to bring up her name, but Mika on TV, who's smarter than her co-host, Roberta Smith, who I think is better than her co-writer in the arts. I see a lot of women there, and my question is this, and I want to shake everybody up by asking it, is there something that women or organizations should be doing? Is there another revolution that's needed to get women up to the next level? Because from everything everybody is saying in such a nice, polite way, to some extent, reminds me of what women used to say and rationalize why they don't have power. And power is really being the top editor, Mindy, as you are, or it's owning the paper. So that's my question for all four of you.
Well, I was co-anchor once with a male co-anchor, and we reported in the morning. This was in South Texas. We covered a lot of issues, cartel crime, immigration issues, et cetera. We both went out each morning. Each day, I brought a story back. Each day, I was back at 2 because we had to go over our scripts and we had to anchor the 4 o'clock. He brought a story back, not each day. He brought a lot of good stories back, but not every day. And he was back at 2:30, 2:45, 3. And when we had the presidential elections, they sent him to field anchor. And when we had a big story in the field, he went, and I anchored from the field. And I said nothing publicly. I had one conversation with my news director who told me, but I know that you do more, but you hold this down.
You what?
And so she said, I know that you do more for the newscast, because the 4 o'clock newscast, we anchored it together, we produced it.
But you hold us down?
No, she said, I know that you do more, but you hold this down, this 4 o'clock newscast. In other words, I was the one checking the scripts, line. You know what I mean? It's a smaller newsroom, a smaller operation. And I said, but it's not fair. I want to go cover the elections. I want to field anchor this big story. Why is it always him? Because I know I can depend on you. And I spent the rest of my time never bringing it up again. And I think sometimes the problem is that we are afraid to lose what we love.
Well, that was the problem even of the women at Newsweek. I mean,
That's
they had
what I
guts.
feel. So
They
I don't
had
really
voice.
have a solution, but that's what I feel.
I would just say you should have brought it up again. I mean,
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, I fight for certain stories. I wanted to cover the rape of these little girls in Congo. I fought until The Guardian took the story, and I went back to Congo. I'd been covering it for 2 years, and I wanted it in the biggest paper possible. Nobody was supporting me on this. I finally got funding from the Women's Media Center to send me there. I got The Guardian to accept a long-form piece, and because of that, basically the story prompted the government to, in 3 years they'd made no arrests. They prompted the government in 4 hours to issue arrest warrants and arrest 68 of the perpetrators. It was incredible, but the reason I bring this up is because you have to be self-propelled and you have to push. Nobody cared about that story. It takes place in a third world country. It takes place, it's like little children nobody cares about. It's rape, like it's a place with war. Nobody cared. But it made a difference because you cannot give up as a woman. I feel like, as a man too, but men just do that. I think, again, are socialized. I really feel like you're right. We need more of a revolution, and we need women to fight just as
So
hard
I like
as we
Mindy,
can.
and especially Rochelle, because I've had many friends who've worked at the Times a little before you. And boy, and I read the Times, and it's written mostly by men. I'm sorry to say that, but it's still. So I'd like your opinions about what can really be done.
Unfortunately, I would say, well, first of all, I speak, like I said, I speak from a bubble, okay? So, the whole place is run by women. Our idea of diversity is we have a CFO, he's a white male. But I realize that's not the case everywhere. But the reality is that I think that we are going through a revolution, and it's digital, and it's kicking our butts, and we're all trying to figure it out. So the reality is this is like changing the tires on an airplane while it's, like it's flying. This is what we're doing running a newsroom right now, and especially one my size, right, which is not, which is like a tenth or something of what the New York Times is. So I don't know how you layer in another, and I think maybe it feels like an excuse to some extent, but it's hard, and that's why I think like somebody I have to keep in mind, like with the rare hire. I don't know how you layer on another revolution because
So maybe timing.
I think it would be, if I have to be honest right now, I think it'd be really difficult because I think the way that things are spinning in our industry, we're just trying to push forward what we do. We're fighting for our very survival.
Yes.
And so this is like another layer to that.
What Gloria always says, I'm sorry, what Gloria always says is that the media should reflect what society looks like. So the Women's Media Center, yes, we don't have men, but we have women of color, we have, a diversity of women, and we have women. But I actually think that that's something that a lot of newsrooms are striving for with programs like Rochelle mentioned. I do think it's different today. I do see in these numbers that I read, they are shifting. And I think that as long as we keep that in mind, that people who consume media need to be talked to by people who look like them and understand them, like you were talking about.
Yeah, I think it's important to, I'll mention three points. One of the things that was really great at the New York Times, we have this group called the Old Girls Club. It's a play on the Old Boys Club. And it's just a women's network. We get together, we bring in really powerful speakers from all over the world, and also people within the newsroom, and talk to them about what they're doing, how they got to where they are, and advice for us. And it's just a network within the New York Times, so you might be happy to know that exists. And I'd also like to say that Twitter is really powerful. We've learned this recently. I think it's one of the points that a gentleman said, which I don't think I would have necessarily been comfortable with this a few months ago, but about shaming companies. Like, I think it's really important to hold companies accountable for when they make mistakes. And because we have this amazing platform where everyone can just say what they want to say, I think Twitter is really powerful, and social media is really powerful. If you want to create change, it's a great place to start. Yeah, I think maybe those are the 2 points. Did that come to your question? Okay, good.
Very good. Thank you all very much.
Yes, I know. We have one more question. We are wrapping up, so maybe we'll take one more. And I'm sorry, that'll be it. Go ahead.
Rochelle, how are you? Wonderful to see you. I wonder if generationally there's a difference, how your generation or the younger generation. And I want to say that the media, you're very powerful. You perhaps don't realize how powerful you are. Very quickly, I saw a piece Anderson Cooper did about rape as a weapon of war, about the Congo. It drove me to the Congo. I now work in the Congo, way up in the bushes. So you perhaps might not see the end result of what you do, but I just want to let you know it's powerful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, thank you so much to our panelists. Let's get them one more round of applause. We really appreciate you being here. We appreciate all of you coming, and we're not done. So we're breaking for lunch. We're back here. Lunch goes till about 1:15. We start again at 1:30 prompt. And
We have two more really great panels this afternoon, so please come back after grab a bite to eat.
yes, and one more note, this evening, if you don't have plans, because you came here, you have access to the FIU World Ahead Tour. It's at the Lauderdale Yacht Club from 6 to 9, so you just need to go there and let them know that you were here today, and you have access to that, and you can get some more info on that after if you're interested in going. Thank you so much for being here. Bye-bye.